For 25 years, the sound of Pelican Bay's walls said nothing. No cameras. No microphones. No witnesses, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the scrape of chains against concrete. But in 2014, for the first time, the silence cracked. Reporters were allowed inside the most notorious supermax in America, and what they found wasn't chaos, it was control. Cold, surgical control. If stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. Pelican Bay State Prison was never designed for rehabilitation. It was built for containment, for isolation so deep that even your thoughts began to echo. The SHU, or Security Housing Unit, was the heart of that system. A place where inmates spent 22 to 23 hours a day in windowless concrete boxes, seeing the sky only through a slit of metal mesh. When the media ban was lifted, the public expected horror. They expected screams, violence, blood on the walls. But what cameras captured was something more chilling: stillness. The kind that makes you realize pain doesn't always scream, sometimes it waits. Inmates walked in slow circles inside their dog-run yards, tiny concrete pens the size of garages. Guards watched from above, faces unreadable behind bulletproof glass. The air carried the faint buzz of radios, the metallic slam of automatic doors, the shuffle of restrained feet. Inside one of those cells was a man named Marcus Dean. Convicted of a gang-related murder in the 90s, he'd spent more than a decade in solitary. He wasn't famous. He wasn't feared. He was just forgotten, until the day a camera lens found him sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at the wall as if it were breathing back. He told the journalist, "They say this place keeps the worst of the worst. But after 10 years, you start asking yourself, what if it makes them?" That interview never aired in full. Parts of it were redacted, and the footage mysteriously disappeared before the documentary's release. Officially, it was a technical issue. Unofficially, the journalist who filmed it was reassigned before the project finished. What remained was a single frame: Marcus, looking directly into the lens, his lips parted as if he was about to say something that could shatter the silence forever. When the press left Pelican Bay that week, they carried more than footage. They carried questions no one wanted answered. Because for the first time, the world had seen the inside of America's most secretive prison, and someone inside had started talking. But not everyone wanted him to keep talking. And within days of the cameras leaving, Marcus Dean vanished from his cell. When the camera crews left Pelican Bay, the silence returned, but something beneath it had shifted. Guards spoke in shorter sentences. Inmates whispered more carefully. Everyone knew Marcus Dean was gone. The official report claimed he'd been transferred for security reasons. But no one ever saw his name on another prison roster again. Inside the SHU, rumors traveled faster than sound. Some said Marcus had smuggled a message out to reporters before he disappeared, a list of names, inmate numbers, maybe even guards involved in something bigger. Others believed the footage had captured more than the Department of Corrections could afford to show: the mechanics of control. They called it the program. For decades, Pelican Bay's SHU had been the invisible backbone of California's prison system. Gang leaders were isolated to cut off communication. In theory, it worked. But in practice, it became a pressure cooker where survival demanded allegiance to someone, to anyone. Those who refused to play along were broken slowly, through silence, time, and cold. One inmate described it later as dying in chapters. What no one outside realized was that isolation itself became a kind of experiment. Prison psychologists were quietly studying behavior patterns, tracking inmate responses to long-term confinement. No names, no headlines, just data. Human adaptation to sensory deprivation, one file read. But inmates were never told. Among the guards, loyalty meant everything. The line between keeping order and keeping secrets blurred years ago. Surveillance wasn't just for inmates anymore. Radios clicked even when no one was speaking. Hallway cameras panned a half-second late, as if someone was watching the watchers. One correctional officer, anonymously referred to in later reports as Officer H, claimed he was ordered to log false activity records for certain cells. When he refused, he was reassigned to a lower security wing within days. He never worked at Pelican Bay again. Meanwhile, a journalist named Sarah Cortez, one of the few allowed inside during the media lift, began receiving unmarked envelopes. Inside, grainy photocopies of internal memos, medical reports, and one chilling note written in block letters: "You looked into the wrong cell." She tried to contact Marcus Dean's family. They hadn't heard from him since the media visit. His letters stopped arriving, his inmate trust account froze, and the Department of Corrections wouldn't confirm his location. By late 2014, the public's interest faded. The news cycle moved on. But inside Pelican Bay, a quiet rebellion brewed in the cracks of concrete walls. Inmates began writing appeals not for release, but for recognition. They wanted the world to see what the silence had done. And then, in December, something extraordinary happened. Without warning, hundreds of inmates across California's prisons began a coordinated hunger strike. No violence, no riots, just absolute refusal. It started, they said, with a single letter smuggled out of Pelican Bay. Signed only with initials, MD. The same initials of the man the system had erased. But that letter didn't just survive the walls, it was about to expose what those walls had been hiding all along. By the time the hunger strike reached its third week, California's prison system was on the edge of a breakdown. Over 30,000 inmates across the state refused food, demanding an end to indefinite solitary confinement. But for those inside Pelican Bay, the origin point, it wasn't just protest. It was testimony. The Department of Corrections called it coordinated manipulation. But even the staff could see something different in the eyes of the men who had stopped eating. They weren't rioting. They weren't yelling. They were simply waiting. In a place built on silence, waiting became its loudest rebellion. Reporters who had once filmed sterile tours of the SHU now camped outside the gates, demanding answers. The same journalist, Sarah Cortez, returned to Crescent City, hoping to pick up Marcus Dean's trail. She carried one of the anonymous envelopes she'd received months earlier, a memo stamped "Confidential, Behavioral Study Continuation." It described something shocking: long-term monitoring of isolated inmates without informed consent. Heart rate, hallucinations, psychological decline, all logged and coded under Program Delta. Marcus's prisoner number appeared in the corner of one page, next to a notation, "Subject no longer communicative." She knew what that meant. When the media began digging deeper, the Department of Corrections finally conceded, yes, isolation at Pelican Bay was under review. Yes, mental health effects had been noted. But they stopped short of admitting how deep the damage ran. Still, the strike forced their hand. After 2 months, California officials agreed to major policy changes. Indefinite solitary confinement would be limited. Review boards would be created. Some men, after decades in the SHU, would finally see another human face again. That was the official victory. The unofficial one came years later, when a former inmate released from Pelican Bay's SHU met with Sarah in a small cafe in Oakland. He handed her a folded piece of lined paper, yellowed and creased. On it were 4 words, written in Marcus Dean's handwriting: "Tell them we existed." That note became the closing line of Sarah's exposé, the day the walls spoke. It aired nationwide, reigniting conversations about solitary confinement and human rights. And for a fleeting moment, Marcus Dean, erased, silenced, studied, became the voice that haunted America's conscience. But even after reforms, Pelican Bay still stands. The corridors are quieter now, the cells less full, yet the walls remember. Every door that shuts, every footstep that echoes, it all carries the residue of those who refuse to disappear. In the end, the media ban may have lifted, but what it revealed wasn't a story of chaos. It was a story of ghosts. Men whose names were stripped from records, but whose silence reshaped an entire system. And though Marcus Dean was never found, his message survived the one thing the system could never fully contain: truth. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.